I'm very disturbed when that kind of publicity, but I like to show only the best of myself.
She was the face of desire, the rebel in high heels, the woman who made the world stare, then vanished without a goodbye. At 90, Brigitte Bardot lives a life few could have predicted, and even fewer understand. No paparazzi, no stage lights, just silence, shadows, and something quietly heartbreaking. Behind the myth lies a version of Bardot the world never truly saw. What happens when a legend no longer wants to be seen? One decision, years ago, changed everything, and it wasn't a role, a marriage, or even retirement. It was something else, and it still echoes in the way she lives today. Her cruel and isolated childhood. Brigitte Bardot's childhood was shaped by an image of privilege that masked a deeper reality of emotional repression and strict discipline. Raised in a wealthy Parisian neighborhood, she lived in a spacious 7-room apartment with her parents and younger sister. But the warmth expected from such a home was absent. Her parents, Louis Bardot and Anne-Marie Moussel, upheld an inflexible Catholic code of behavior. Daily routines, friendships, even mannerisms were dictated with precision. Her mother, in particular, was cold and hypercritical, routinely disparaging Brigitte's appearance and demeanor, which seeded long-lasting insecurity. Despite her artistic passions, including ballet, Brigitte's early environment allowed little room for individuality or emotional safety. Her training at the Conservatoire de Paris, a milestone for any young artist, became yet another space of harsh judgment. There, she faced relentless criticism from instructors, further deepening the sense of inadequacy she already felt at home. Her passion for dance was eclipsed by the constant pressure to be perfect, a theme that would repeat throughout her life. That sense of never being enough became foundational to how she saw herself, both in her career and personal life. Arguably, the most disturbing example of emotional distance within her family came in the form of punishment. Reportedly, when Brigitte and her sister broke a vase accidentally, their father whipped them 20 times each. However, beyond the punishment, her parents began addressing the girls with the formal vous, a form of address used for strangers or acquaintances. That's rather extreme emotional withdrawal, subtle and devastating. The bond between family members has been formally severed. For young Brigitte, it was not a matter of discipline, it was exile. One incident that stands out happened without warning, on a day when her parents served her pet rabbit, Noiro, for dinner. The trauma of that moment is thought to have influenced her later campaigning on behalf of animal rights. But at the time, that reinforced the message that she had already received, that her feelings didn't matter, that love could be conditional, or, at times, cruel. It is this combination of early betrayals, parental coldness, social estrangement, and emotional abandonment that explains the deep longing and unpredictability Bardot would carry into adulthood with her. Did she get to be a real child at some point? Before the world saw her as a fantasy, it first saw her as a product, and that spotlight came with a price she never truly escaped. Born to be watched, Brigitte Bardot became a global sensation almost overnight. Her breakout role in And God Created Woman, 1956, not only introduced her as a provocative new face in cinema, but redefined the concept of female sexuality on screen. Directed by her then-husband Roger Vadim, the film captured Bardot's raw allure and marked a cultural shift. She wasn't just an actress, she became a symbol. Her image spread worldwide, saturating magazines, film posters, and headlines. But the sensual persona that made her famous quickly outgrew her control, evolving into something that often conflicted with her private self. As Bardot's fame escalated, the pressure to maintain her cultural icon of attraction status intensified. Public appearances, fashion trends, and even her body became objects of scrutiny and expectation. The Bardot neckline, her barefoot photo shoots, and her effortless allure made her a trendsetter, yet also tethered her to a brand of femininity she didn't always choose. Her natural beauty and uninhibited screen presence were celebrated, but they also boxed her into roles that emphasized image over substance. Even as she delivered complex performances in films like Contempt and Private Life, the public rarely looked beyond her appearance. Thereafter, the cycle of being seen, evaluated, and desired would go on forever. Paparazzi trail behind her everywhere. Journalists analyzed her relationships and clothing with more interest than any of her performances. Bardot was one of the most photographed women in the world, although that unyielding scrutiny made her feel exposed. Interviews given in later years reveal her discomfort with this attention. Fame, she felt, was stifling. It distorted her sense of self and constantly made her feel like a product instead of a person. The psychological toll of that objectification began setting in with time. Did Bardot ever truly own her fame, or was she never free of its clutches? That is a question that never really goes away. Surely, her expression of leaving the scene at the age of 38 indicated that stardom never felt like something you could count on. Beneath the glamour was growing detachment and fatigue. Bardot's beauty brought her fame, but it made it harder for audiences to see her pain, intelligence, or independence. The very allure that rendered her an icon also imprisoned her, and that utterly contradictory scheme forms one of the most telling facets of her legacy. As her career progressed, Bardot began to speak out more candidly about the disconnect between her public image and her private identity. She resented being reduced to a symbol, voicing frustration that few cared to understand the woman behind the image. Her on-screen sensuality had become a double-edged sword, opening doors professionally while closing them emotionally. Directors often cast her not for range or nuance, but for the provocative effect her presence guaranteed. It didn't matter if she could act, it mattered that she could be watched. This voyeuristic dynamic defined much of her cinematic legacy and fed into a public appetite that rarely asked if she felt seen on her own terms. The men who burned through her life. Brigitte Bardot's romantic life was as dramatic and turbulent as her on-screen roles. Her first marriage to director Roger Vadim began when she was just 18. Vadim not only shaped her early career, but also helped mold her public image. However, while he launched her into international stardom with An God-Created Woman, their relationship deteriorated amid infidelity and emotional distance. Bardot began an affair with actor Jean-Louis Trintignant during filming, which led to the breakdown of her marriage to Vadim. This pattern of intense, short-lived romances would repeat throughout her life. Her second husband, Jacques Charrier, was also her co-star in Babette Goes to War. Their relationship began quickly and ended even faster. Bardot gave birth to their son, Nicolas, in 1960, but she struggled profoundly with motherhood and emotional connection. The marriage dissolved after just 3 years, and Charrier was granted full custody of their child. Bardot's deep sense of entrapment in that relationship would later manifest in bitter legal battles and public statements that shocked many. She once confessed she had harmed herself in an attempt to end the pregnancy and likened childbirth to a form of punishment. Sachs was a wealthy German playboy, known for flying over Bardot's residence in a helicopter and showering it with roses. A very public spectacle, the marriage was, however, less than rosy. He would later claim that a year with Bardot was worth 10 with anyone else, a recognition of her highly unpredictable, tempestuous spirit. Meanwhile, during this marriage, Bardot was involved with the musician Serge Gainsbourg. Their collaboration produced some highly controversial music, though the relationship itself was short, stormy, and controversial, especially after the couple's intimate recording of Je t'aime moi non plus was pulled from release at Bardot's husband's request. Bardot is one, possibly the most famous, of the French women who had numerous affairs across her lifetime, invariably with creative and powerful men. But none were to provide her any emotional stability in the long run. Did her partners see her as a person, or just as the myth they helped construct? Was Bardot chasing love, or simply reacting to it in the same volatile manner she had learned in childhood? The thread common to each relationship was imbalance, either far too much intensity or far too little support. As much as Bardot was adored, she often seemed fundamentally alone in love. These patterns didn't just play out in private. They were splashed across tabloids and dissected by journalists who treated her relationships like serialized drama. Each affair became part of her public narrative, and with every breakup came another round of headlines. Lovers became co-stars in a story she couldn't control. Whether it was Italian actor Sammy Frey, Brazilian musician Sasha Distel, or even a rumored connection to Pablo Picasso, Bardot's romances became entangled with her fame. The question was never just who she loved, but how she loved, and how deeply those connections mirrored the chaos within her. For Bardot, intimacy rarely offered safety. It often reignited the same emotional volatility she'd tried to escape. Even in her later years, long after she had withdrawn from the spotlight, reflections on love continued to stir regret. Bardot has spoken candidly in interviews about the emotional exhaustion these relationships left behind. While some remember her as a liberated woman in control of her sexuality, she has hinted at a different reality, one shaped by dependence, disillusionment, and repeated disappointment. Love, for Bardot, seemed less like a sanctuary and more like a battlefield. Whether she was idolized, envied, or misunderstood, the constant through line remained. Connection often came at the cost of her own emotional balance. A mother in name only, Brigitte Bardot's approach to motherhood was marked by deep ambivalence and, at times, open rejection. When she discovered she was pregnant with her only child, Nicolas, in 1959, she reacted with despair rather than joy. In her memoir, Initiales BB, Bardot described staring at her stomach in the mirror and mourning the body she believed she was about to lose. The pregnancy was not something she embraced, it was something she endured. Under pressure from her parents and then husband, Jacques Charrier, she carried the child to term, but emotionally, she was already detached. The birth of Nicolas did not resolve that distance, it deepened it. Bardot admitted to having taken desperate measures to try to end the pregnancy, including physically harming herself and requesting morphine from her doctor. These confessions, later published in her autobiography, would become a source of public scandal and personal pain. In a particularly shocking statement, she once said she would have preferred to give birth to a puppy. While this may sound cruel, it likely reflected the emotional reality she had lived through, one where human relationships had long been a source of suffering. As Nicolas grew older, Bardot's detachment manifested in estrangement and legal disputes. After divorcing Charrier, she lost custody of Nicolas, and over the years, their relationship deteriorated further. In 1997, both her ex-husband and her son filed lawsuits over her memoir, which they claimed violated their privacy and misrepresented them. The court ordered Bardot to pay damages, and several passages of the book were required to carry disclaimers. The legal battle underscored the emotional gap between mother and son, a relationship fractured by years of neglect and unresolved tension. Despite brief reports of reconciliation in the 1990s, particularly around the time Nicolas became a father himself, the scars remain. Bardot has expressed some regret about how things unfolded, but she has never portrayed herself as a nurturing figure. Was she ever emotionally capable of being a mother, given her upbringing and the pressures of fame? Or was her rejection of the role an act of survival? In either case, the result was a fractured bond that continues to shape both of their lives. For a woman worshipped by millions, her most personal relationship was one marked not by love, but by silence, distance, and unresolved pain. Her abrupt exit from fame. Brigitte Bardot's departure from the entertainment industry came as abruptly as her rise to fame. At the age of 38, at the height of her global celebrity, she stepped away from acting, modeling, and singing without a farewell performance or press announcement. It wasn't a strategic retreat or a carefully planned transition. It was a sudden decision driven by emotional exhaustion. In later interviews, Bardot explained that she simply had enough. The fame that had once empowered her had become, in her own words, suffocating. She no longer recognized herself in the image the public demanded of her. Her decision was partly sparked by a moment during the filming of a project in France, where she encountered a woman walking a baby goat. Bardot, deeply affected, purchased the animal on the spot and brought it back to her hotel. She later described the moment as a turning point. As she cradled the goat in her arms, she realized she felt more connected to that creature than to the film set or the career she had built. It was then that she began asking herself whether she wanted to continue aging in front of cameras that had already taken so much from her. The answer was no. Unlike other celebrities who slowly faded from public view, Bardot retreated with purpose. She refused to give interviews for years, declined film offers, and shut the door firmly on any form of public return. To this day, she remains one of the few stars of her stature to have quit show business entirely and permanently. Many found the move perplexing. Why would someone so admired, so powerful in her influence, vanish from the world that made her? But for Bardot, it wasn't abandonment, it was escape. She once remarked, "I gave my youth and my beauty to men. I am going to give my wisdom and experience to animals." This exit was not without emotional cost. Fame had consumed Bardot's privacy, distorted her relationships, and taken a toll on her mental health. Her abrupt withdrawal was not an act of rebellion. It was a necessary step for survival, but it left a gap, too. Fans were left with only her past work and fragmented images of a woman who had once lit up the screen. The silence she embraced after stepping away spoke volumes. It was her final statement, that the person behind the icon was no longer willing to be on display. Trading scripts for shelters, Bardot didn't just disappear, she transformed, and what came next was far from quiet. Rebirth in fur and feathers. After walking away from fame, Brigitte Bardot redirected her energy into a cause that had lingered in her heart since childhood: animal rights. In 1986, she founded the Brigitte Bardot Foundation for the Welfare and Protection of Animals, using her fame and financial resources to advocate for the ethical treatment of animals in France and around the world. The foundation quickly became one of Europe's most recognized voices in the fight against cruelty, tackling issues like the fur trade, animal testing, bullfighting, and the slaughter of seals and dolphins. Bardot's commitment wasn't passive. She campaigned publicly, met with political leaders, and personally funded rescue operations. Her activism wasn't a hobby, it was a complete identity shift. Bardot once said, "I gave up everything for this cause," and she meant it. She turned her home, La Madrague, into a refuge for rescued animals, often living among dogs, goats, and birds. While many celebrities endorsed causes for visibility, Bardot withdrew from the spotlight and gave her post-Hollywood years entirely to advocacy. Her passion was genuine and at times extreme. She denounced industries, criticized governments, and challenged traditional practices, regardless of the backlash. Her stance earned her both praise from animal welfare groups and criticism from political figures. However, her deep compassion for animals stood in sharp contrast to her public attitude toward people. In numerous interviews, Bardot expressed disdain for human behavior, once stating plainly, "Humans disgust me." Her frustration often came from witnessing indifference to animal suffering, but her rhetoric sometimes crossed into controversial territory. Her foundation's work remained influential, but Bardot's statements and tone increasingly alienated potential allies. Was this misanthropy a defense mechanism, a reflection of her own emotional injuries, or simply the price of her intense empathy for animals? Regardless, it shaped the perception of her in later life. Despite personal health challenges and public scrutiny, Bardot never retreated from her cause. She remained unwavering in her criticism of practices she deemed inhumane, including hunting with dogs and the conditions of livestock farming. As she aged, she continued to write letters to political officials and release public appeals, pleading for reforms. While some might view her later years as marked by controversy, isolation, and bitterness, others see them as years of purpose, defined not by glamour or applause, but by conviction. In the end, Bardot may have left behind the adoration of audiences, but she gained a legacy as a fierce and unapologetic defender of the voiceless. Her silent battles with illness. In her later years, Brigitte Bardot faced not just the loneliness of fame's aftermath, but a string of serious physical ailments that slowly eroded her once mythic vitality. Diagnosed with breast cancer in the early 1980s, she reportedly refused invasive treatment for some time. fearing anesthesia and surgical complications. Although the cancer was eventually treated, it marked the beginning of a long period of health decline. Over time, Bardot also developed severe osteoarthritis, a condition that left her in chronic pain and dependent on walking canes to move. The woman once known for her confident stride and radiant presence was now mostly confined to her home. These health struggles were compounded by respiratory problems, including episodes of bronchitis and reported lung weakness, worsened by decades of smoking. Bardot's own resistance to conventional medical intervention made her path more complicated. According to people close to her, she often chose natural remedies over modern therapies and resisted hospitalization whenever possible. Though some interpreted her avoidance of doctors as a personal preference, others saw it as a deeper fear, perhaps of vulnerability, or of surrendering control over her own body, which had long been scrutinized and judged by the world. Despite the physical pain, Bardot rarely discussed her illnesses in public. She maintained a guarded silence, rarely appearing in interviews and never publicly acknowledging the full scope of her condition. When pressed, she would often deflect, focusing instead on her foundation's animal rights work. But former associates have shared that her day-to-day life is marked by physical limitation, with long periods of isolation and difficulty performing basic tasks. A former husband once noted, "Every birthday is torture for her." Whether hyperbole or truth, the statement captures how Bardot may experience the passage of time, not as a celebration, but as a reminder of fading strength and persistent pain. Rumors have circulated over the years about her declining mobility and quality of life, but Bardot herself has rarely responded to speculation. What is known is this: her health has left her largely homebound in Saint-Tropez, where she spends her days surrounded by animals, letters, and memory. For a woman who once embodied movement, energy, and vitality, the contrast is stark. Perhaps she chose silence, because speaking about her body's decline would force her to confront it more directly. Or perhaps she believes that suffering, like fame, is best endured privately. Either way, her struggle with illness adds a quiet but powerful chapter to the story of a life shaped by endurance as much as it was by beauty. Scandal in the shadows. In her later years, Brigitte Bardot's public persona shifted dramatically, from once being a symbol of consensual intimacy rights and rebellion to becoming a source of frequent controversy. As she aged into her 80s and 90s, Bardot began making public statements that many found offensive, divisive, or deeply out of touch. One of the most notable examples was her defense of actor Gérard Depardieu after he faced allegations of indecent assault. While many distanced themselves from the embattled star, Bardot defended him, calling the accusations part of a witch hunt, drawing criticism for minimizing the seriousness of the claims. She didn't stop there. Bardot also made headlines for expressing strong and often inflammatory views on immigration and Islam in France. In interviews and open letters, she criticized the presence of Muslims in the country, accused immigrants of destroying French identity, and decried halal slaughter practices, tying her animal rights advocacy to broader political rhetoric. These statements resulted in multiple convictions for inciting racial hatred. Since 1997, Bardot has been fined 6 times by French courts for these remarks, a record that casts a long shadow over her later legacy. Her stance on feminism also surprised many. Despite having embodied female liberation on screen, Bardot dismissed modern feminist movements as unnecessary and exaggerated. In her view, feminism had gone too far, turning into a grievance machine rather than a force for equality. For a generation that once saw her as an icon of defiance, her refusal to align with contemporary social movements felt like a betrayal. Was Bardot rejecting change, or was she simply unable to adapt to a world that had evolved past her views? Either way, her words often placed her at odds with the public she once captivated. These controversies didn't erase her accomplishments, but they complicated them. Was Bardot expressing authentic, if unpopular, beliefs? Or had decades of isolation hardened her into someone unwilling to see nuance? Some argue her views reflect the conservatism of her generation. Others say they reveal a bitterness that grew in solitude. Regardless of intent, her statements left a deep imprint. Once celebrated for her boundary-breaking presence, Bardot became a figure many distanced themselves from, an icon whose myth was increasingly eclipsed by the weight of her own opinions. In the end, she wasn't just controversial, she was emblematic of a tension between past and present, unable, or perhaps unwilling, to evolve with the times. A palace of solitude. Brigitte Bardot has lived in near-total seclusion for decades at her villa, La Madrague, in Saint-Tropez, a property that was once a symbol of glamour, now transformed into a private world cut off from society. Originally a modest fisherman's house when she purchased it in the late 1950s, La Madrague became her refuge after she retreated from public life. The property has remained largely unchanged over the years, a physical time capsule where Bardot surrounds herself with animals, handwritten letters, and the silence she long sought. To outsiders, it may seem peaceful. To others, perhaps stifling. She rarely receives visitors. Communication with the outside world is minimal, mostly limited to handwritten correspondence, faxes, and formal letters. Bardot has no mobile phone and is known to avoid the internet entirely. Her circle of friends has dwindled over the years, and even family contact is virtually non-existent. Her relationship with her son remains distant, and many former collaborators have spoken of the difficulty in reaching her. This chosen isolation has become as defining as her earlier fame. It's not a byproduct of old age, it is deliberate, sustained, and deeply personal. La Madrague is not just a residence, it's a barrier. Security around the estate is tight, with fences, surveillance, and strict access control. Photographers have long given up trying to capture new images of Bardot, as even aerial shots are discouraged or blocked. For someone once omnipresent in global media, her complete withdrawal from the visual landscape is striking. It raises a quiet question. Is her retreat a way to preserve dignity in aging, or has it become a form of emotional exile? There's no clear answer, but her vanishing act speaks volumes. Inside the villa, Bardot reportedly lives among dozens of animals, dogs, cats, and birds, many of them rescued or adopted. It is a life focused on routine and care, not appearances or public approval. Yet this solitude comes at a cost. Some say she is lonely, others argue she is simply finished with the world. At 90, her days are spent not in conversation, but in reflection. She once lived for cameras and crowds. Now she lives for silence. The woman who once symbolized freedom now appears bound by her own need for separation. Whether this is peace or resignation depends on how one views the line between solitude and isolation. Even behind closed gates and silence, the weight of everything she once was still lingers, and it shows in ways few ever expected. The woman behind the myth. Brigitte Bardot's legacy is both celebrated and conflicted. To some, she remains the very definition of a cinematic icon, unapologetic, magnetic, and revolutionary. But beneath that public image lies a woman whose life has been marked by emotional isolation, personal contradictions, and a persistent struggle to find peace. At nearly 90, Bardot is no longer just a former star. She is a person shaped by decades of being admired, misunderstood, criticized, and ultimately alone. Her own words capture this duality best. With me, life is only made of the best and the worst. There seems to be little in between. Bardot's trajectory challenges the illusion that fame brings fulfillment. She had global admiration, influence, and beauty that defined an era, but those assets became burdens over time. She rejected Hollywood, love faltered in her private life, and motherhood never brought connection. Her activism gave her purpose, yet it also alienated many. Even in her retirement, her public remarks often sparked outrage, revealing a woman who seemed increasingly out of step with the world around her. Is Bardot a victim of her era, or a product of her own choices? Perhaps both. Her story isn't one of downfall in the traditional sense. There was no public collapse, no tabloid scandal that ruined her. Instead, what lingers is the quiet unraveling of a life lived in extremes. She sought freedom, but often felt caged. She influenced culture, but rarely felt understood. She withdrew from fame to find meaning, yet solitude may have deepened her emotional wounds. At La Madrague, her chosen exile, Bardot's silence now speaks louder than her films once did. There, the most photographed woman in history has become nearly invisible. In the end, Bardot remains a figure full of contradictions, celebrated yet criticized, remembered yet removed. Her life has been anything but easy, and certainly not glamorous in its later years, but it is undeniably real. If there's any lesson in her story, it may be this: fame does not shield one from pain, and legacy is not always a comfort. Bardot's myth will live on, but the woman behind it is something far more complicated, a person shaped by longing, by loss, and by a refusal to conform, even in solitude. That tension is what defines her, not just a legend, but a lament. Brigitte Bardot's story is a reminder that even icons carry invisible weight. If this glimpse into her life moved you, let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more stories that look past the spotlight, and click the next video on your screen to keep watching. There's more to uncover.